Hello, today we are going to be describing the Toronet blockchain, the principles behind it, and the objective of the blockchain. And in the same video, I will be describing how the Toronet transactions work on the fundamental level. The Toronet blockchain is conceived as a blockchain that focuses on directly enhancing productivity in rural and underbanked communities. We focus on the transactions and what hinders the growth of those transactions in those communities. So much of it is focused on the agricultural development and produce financing, agricultural loans, and incentives to those that are part of that ecosystem directly. Of course, at the basic level, it's a blockchain digital ledger, and it also includes in it contracts that enable trust in that community to to basically incentivize the development of those activities in there. For instance, let's look at agricultural loan financing. That's an area where some of the things that hamper that activity is high default rates, knowing which farmers actually have the needs and have the capability to develop agricultural produce and get the direct needs to them in terms of the inputs, agricultural inputs, things like fertilizers and equipment, and then getting those to be applied directly to what it is intended for. Smart contracts with Ricardian structures have been created to enable this, and some of those are the things that we're going to be going into. But first, let me explain how Toronet functions. Toronet is not like a blockchain that creates assets from mining transactions with a lot of computational difficulty, or creating assets out of thin air. There is no pre-mining, there is no founders having tokens and then going on exchanges and advertising those tokens and then hoping it will rise in value, and without really having much activity, economic activity, or much value going on behind it. Toronet is based on stable coins. What that means is any asset that's on the blockchain is backed by real world assets reserved elsewhere. In fact, it is a stable coin of stable coins, and I will explain what that means. But first, let's understand what are stable coins. An example of a stable coin is, for instance, the Tether. Let's look at here where some of that is described. A stable coin is basically a digital representation of an asset within a different ecosystem. For instance, there's real world assets, dollars, and in an ecosystem like on a blockchain, there's a representation of a dollar, and that's called a dollar stable coin. It's equivalent in value and is interconvertible, meaning if I put $1 into a stable coin, my dollar in the real world is gone, and in exchange I will call that consumed, and in exchange I get an equivalent dollar in that different ecosystem with the same buying power as the dollar. Okay, so it's a kind of perfectly elastic supply situation, because if there's any form of scarcity involved, then the value of the stablecoin will go up, but the value of the stablecoin is pegged to the real world asset, and that means that there cannot be any imbalance between the demand and the supply. It must be perfect. If I need a stablecoin dollar in the blockchain world, I should be able to take my real dollar, provide it to the provider of the stablecoin, and in exchange get a stablecoin on demand. And the reverse is also the same. If I want to cash out my stablecoin dollar for real world dollars, I should be able to do that. Okay, so it can be exchanged for the underlying asset at will and on demand, as explained. Usually it's set up as a one-to-one conversion, meaning if I have $1 on the other ecosystem, the blockchain system, I'll also have one stablecoin dollar. But it does not need to be. If the rate was set as 40-1, the important thing is just that it has to be fixed in that same ratio. So if always 40 stablecoin equal to $1 and has the same buying power in that ecosystem, the blockchain ecosystem, as $1, then always 40 of that stablecoin should always represent that. The gold standard, by that definition, was effectively a dollar stable coin. At that time, I think it was 22 ounces of gold, somewhere around that, was supposed to represent $1. So dollars were minted, and backing them was an equivalent amount of gold. And the idea is actually you should have been able to take your dollars to like the Federal Reserve at that time and cash it out for gold, because there was always an ounce, some ounces of gold representing and standing in place for that dollar. So this concept is old, the concept of stablecoin, but it creates trust, because you know that those assets that you're holding at any time in that ecosystem, whether it's in the case of the real world previously, where the dollar, fiat dollar, was backed by gold, you knew that your dollar, even though it was a piece of paper, was really worth something, because you could go to some authority and get this amount of gold that has that same value. All right. So the stable coins denote the concept of a reserve. So the Toronet does have a reserve backing it. Examples of blockchain stable coins is the Tether, for instance, USD coin. Those are some popular ones. Bitcoins. Now, Bitcoin itself was made into a stable coin on the Ethereum blockchain, in which case there will be Bitcoins created on Ethereum that represented real, if we can say real world Bitcoins, that represented Bitcoins on the Bitcoins blockchain. So now the different ecosystem was the Ethereum ecosystem, and then Bitcoins were brought onto that. Now the advantage of that is that Ethereum is a faster blockchain and can handle more transactions, so it was now easier. And also Ethereum could have smart contracts written, which is being able to program the assets, and that was a big leap. So now if you brought Bitcoin onto the Ethereum workspace, into the Ethereum blockchain space, then you now begin to be able to do things you could do with Ethereum with those Bitcoins. So that was what wrapped Bitcoins did. There's also the DAI, which is the dollar stable coin, but the mechanism for pegging it was different. It was, the reserves for it was backed by other blockchain assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a slew of other currencies. And the Libra, as was originally proposed by Facebook with the Libra Foundation, was really a stable coin as well, but was backed by a basket of fiat currencies. So now let's look at how a stable coin works. It just means that in the USD real world, there will be a dollar. You put that dollar into a reserve. In exchange, a dollar is created for you on the blockchain. And the Tether was an example of that. So let's look at how that looks like on an exchange. This is an example of an exchange that has a bunch of cryptocurrencies, and of course also includes some of the cryptocurrencies that are stable coins. Let's expand this. It's loading here. Okay, the site there loading the assets. All right, so there's Bitcoin on this exchange, and there's the price of one Bitcoin, 38,000 at this time. There's Ethereum, currently 1,284 at this time. There's the Tether, and look at that, it's $1, but it's really a stable coin dollar. I mean, there's an actual dollar that is intended to be backing it, so its price always stays the same, because again, it's perfectly elastic system. If I wanted Tether, I would simply bring my dollar to it, and they would immediately on demand provide me with a Tether. So there's no scarcity situation where the price will not be bid up higher. For instance, if I needed Tether so badly and I can't get them, then I might be able to go to someone else and say, I'll offer you $1.05 for your Tether, and now the Tether begins to grow in value. But because I'm always able to on demand go to the source that mints Tether and say, look, here's my dollar, here's my $10, give me 10 USDTs, and they would. There's no reason for there's no mechanism for the prices to be driven up, right? So there's other currencies, and like I said, USD is another, also a stable coin with a perfect dollar peg. And there was the wrap BTC, which we said. Now notice this, the price of the WBTC is about similar as Bitcoin, which is about 38,000. And I think we do have Maker there. So Maker creates stable coins called DAI, and the Maker itself is the mechanism, governing mechanism by which the DAI is created and helps to stabilize and peg the value of the DAI to the dollar. So it stays roughly around 1. We're not going to spend so much time on that, but here is the DAI, and it looks like it's perfectly pegged at $1. And so if I have an asset that they allow in the reserve, like Bitcoin, I could deposit that into the Maker contract and get an equivalent amount of DAI created according to the rules of their network. I think it's collateralized by a ratio. So if I brought in 100 Bitcoins, I might be able to create maybe 70% value of DAI of that. It's also a loan system, and when I want, I return the DAI, I can get back my reserved assets. So they use the reserve also as a kind of collateral system. And so that's how stablecoins works. And when you look at the Theta website, they do also describe that digital money for the digital age, and they are supposed to have a backing. There's a proof of the funds, which is basically showing what they're here. I presume they're going to show that the reserve balances out with the amount of Thetas they've created. So there's a description. Theta converts cash into digital currency to anchor or Theta the value to the price of the national currency, like the US dollar. They have other stable coins, not just the dollar. They have a euro, and they have a yuan, and others as well. It's supposed to be 100% backed according to this information here, and it's supposed to be transparent. So the values of the reserve is published daily. I suppose if we look here, we might see that daily publication. It's based on blockchain technology, so it has some advantages in that you can see in an open ledger what exactly has been created and how much it is, and it's been implemented in so many places. So that is basically it in a nutshell. And now the Toronet follows the same principle of the stablecoin, and here we have several stablecoins that are supported. There's the pound, meaning if you bring £100, you could get £100 stablecoin version on the Toronet network, and the same thing with the euro, and the same thing with the dollar, and the same thing with naira. So now what is the Toro? The Toro itself is now a blockchain that any of the assets that have been brought onto the blockchain, which at that point are stablecoins themselves, can now convert to the Toro, and their conversion ratios between the Toros and any of these assets, and the amount in reserve always balances what is being created on the blockchain in terms of value. I will be going through that next. Before proceeding, it is very, very important to mention that one of the areas that's not automated and is sort of like a weak link in stablecoins is the maintenance of the off-chain reserve. There are many people who do not believe that this is being done well by some of the companies that maintain stablecoins, in that there is not enough validation that when an asset is actually deposited off-chain and then the stablecoin is created on-chain on the blockchain, that indeed there's validation or verification that that asset has been created. So that's one area that the Toronet blockchain will work on. The verification of the amount that's claimed to be off-chain is something that's going to be transparently shown on the website, validated by a financial authority with a banking statement that shows that this amount indeed that was claimed to have been deposited off chain, and for which the same amount has been created on the blockchain, has indeed been deposited and is continuously maintained in reserve, just like with the gold standard, right, where you would go to like some fort and you see that this amount of gold exists to back this amount of dollars that were indeed created as a reflection of that reserved asset. As a quick introduction to the blockchain, we will be looking at how assets get brought onto the blockchain. Right, since we already explained that assets on the blockchain are stable coins backed by real world assets. So how those assets get brought onto the blockchain, how Toros get created as stable coins, how other currency types that are supported get deposited, and the stable coin versions of them get created. The difference between the permissions and activities that a node member can perform and users can perform. So two quick activities will be completed in this quick introduction. But first, as a general intro to the blockchain, the Toro blockchain itself is a 2.5 second blockchain. So every 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds, a new block is created. So the wait time for transactions is extremely small. The reason for this is it's made for real world commerce, so that when people make payments, they do not have to wait 10 minutes, as in the case of Bitcoin, before their transactions are committed. So transactions are created very quickly. It's a permissioned node staking consensus algorithm, which was explained a little bit before, but details is beyond the scope of this quick short presentation. But it simply means that instead of using a lot of electricity to safeguard and calculations basically to safeguard the blockchain is safeguarded by having selected members who have stakes in the blockchain. Basically, they have an interest in the blockchain health and the blockchain viability, and any harm to the blockchain basically harms their own interest as well. This is also the model that Ethereum is moving to when it becomes staking based consensus. And finally, just like any blockchain, it is address based. It's based on private key encryption, public private key encryption, and the same principles. It's a balanced account system, just like the Ethereum blockchain. It has features for smart contracts and programming. Okay, so we'll go in quickly. Details can be seen here, but we will not. Anyone can check that later at this address. We'll be going into how a node operator brings in resources onto the blockchain, brings in assets onto the blockchain. So the first thing we'll do is take a look at the assets that are supported right now as reserve assets. So you can bring in pounds into the reserve, and pounds on the blockchain will be created for you as stable coins, which can now be converted to Toros. You can bring in euros, and euros on the blockchain will be created for you, which you can now convert to Toros. So anything that's brought onto the blockchain has an equivalent reserve, as explained previously, and the same equivalent item asset is created on the blockchain. So if you bring in $100 and deposit in the reserve with a foundation member, $100 will be created for you on the blockchain, which can now be converted to Toros. Now, when a node operator brings in resources, that's the first thing. So that is the node operator has the ability to bring in resources onto the reserve. So this is the Naira reserve address, right, which we see there, and that is here. Currently, the blockchain is pristine. It's at its initial state. There's nothing on the blockchain, and there's no balance here. So as an example, we will have this node operator deposit 200,000 Naira into the reserve. Okay, we will confirm that. And so this exercise simply means that this node member is vouching that this exact amount has been placed in as real fiat currency into the reserve. Now, there are off-chain operational procedures to verify this, which was explained before. And so, unlike some stable coins, we are going to maintain a very strict, very transparent system where anyone will be able to verify that indeed 200,000 Naira that exists on the blockchain now. So this is in the reserve of the blockchain. It was imported into the reserve, and what that means is by the time this is done in an off-chain real-world account that belongs to the blockchain system foundation, 200,000 Naira has been deposited in there to back this amount. So off-chain, there's this amount. On the blockchain in the reserve, there is this amount. So this is the beginning of the transactions on the blockchain. So something else we'll take a quick look at is the purchase rate between the Naira and the Toro is set at 1. Okay, the purchase rate between the Toros and the Nairas is set as 1.0417. I'm gonna just make that exact because I want that to be 95 cents to 1. So we're gonna make a change to that. Let me make a quick computation here. Aside, I have a calculator here. I could do that. 95 cents 95.95, sorry, 0.95. Let's clear all this. Divided by. Okay, so the selling price, that is odd. Okay, this is fine. Will be 10526. So we're gonna put that in there. Now, these rates are all determined and decided by vote by the foundation members. But for this exercise, we've just decided that the Toros as a stable coin are created 1-to-1 with the Naira, right? And when a member, a user withdraws Toros, is withdrawn at the rate of 95.95 to 1, so that the reserve actually makes a gain when assets are brought onto the blockchain and withdrawn, just like any foreign exchange that anyone is familiar with. Okay, and what that means is if the Toro as a stable coin is made to be sort of on par with the Naira, with the other currencies, euros and pounds, it must reflect the same equivalent rate between those currencies and the Naira to keep an equivalency. But we will get to all that. So something else to look at here are transaction fees. So if a user has Naira on the blockchain and makes and transfers Naira to another member, just like making a payment, just like with any banking system, these are the fees that are charged. But the blockchain can make transactions in any of the stable coins that has been brought in, but the primary asset that is intended for transactions on the blockchain is the Toro. So while these features exist, only applications that are going to be made available to users will be one that encourages them to transact in Toros rather than transacting some of the stable coins that they bring in. But technically, the blockchain can make transactions in Naira stable coins, dollar stable coins, pound stable coins, euro stable coins, and any other stable coins that are chosen to be supported on the blockchain. Other parameters to prevent denial of service attack are minimum transactions amounts, maximum transaction amounts, including the fees, of course, and commission address, which we'll look at in later presentation, and commission percent, and so on. So now that we have established this, let's look at what the blockchain dashboard looks like, and also what the system of account looks like. We're just going to refresh that page and see what the dashboard looks like right now. So in the blockchain right now, of all the assets we have, this is the reserve side of the ledger. This is in circulation, meaning every other account that's not a reserve account. So on this blockchain now, there's 200,000 Naira in reserve, which is backed by real world 200,000 Naira, proven in some bank account in the real world. And there's no dollar in the reserve, no euro, and no pounds. Now, in this system, to make this simple, a reserve account for the Naira is different and separate from the dollar reserve account, which is separate from the euro and separate from the pound, just for ease of accounting. But they are all reserve accounts that maintain what is belonging to the reserve, which is operated by the foundation. So now we will have the node operator decide to create mullahs from this Naira. Let's just use up half of it, for instance. Before we do that, okay, this page has not finished refreshing, so we'll just proceed for now. So the first thing we will do is we will convert. When in only node operators, foundation node members can convert assets to Toro, stablecoin assets to Toro. So we're going to convert some of these 200,000 Naira to Toros. And when that happens, whatever we convert has to be destroyed on the one side and created on the other side to maintain a conservative asset scheme where nothing can be created, or no new assets cannot be brought to life, right? It just has to be converted from one form to the other. So if you have 100,000 Toros, you must have also, in creating it, you must have also destroyed 100,000 Naira, to use a very simple description of this. So We are going to, it's called buying and selling, but for the node operators, this is really a conversion. On the one side of the ledger, one asset that exists will no longer exist, and in its place, the new asset equivalent to it will be created. So we're going to convert 100,000 naira to 100,000 Toros. First, let's check the balance. So we have 100,000 naira and no Toros. So we're going to now make that conversion, only 100,000 out of it. But before we do that, let's go see what all the accounts look like. So this is a big picture look at everything we have in the reserve. This is all about the Toros. Right now there are no Toros in the system, and these are parameters, fees. The fee is 1 Toro anytime a transaction or transfer or exchange is done between accounts. These are all set by node members. It doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily this high, and the fee system is such that this is maximum or off. So if 2 Toros are transferred, the fee will be 1 Toro. But again, these are just for this illustration. The node operators will meet and set what all of these parameters will be. And this is the reserve. This is the reserve Toro address, and this is the commission address, and so on. And this is for the Naira. Right now, we already have 200,000 Naira on the blockchain, which is the total supply. And off-chain, we have this, which is verifiable, and which will be verifiable. And the same thing with the dollar, set of similar parameters. Same thing with the euros, and same thing with the pounds. Okay, so here are all the accounts. As I said before, the system is made for ease and transparency to have different reserves for each of the different assets that's supported. So this is the Toro reserve, and this are the balances, nothing in it. This is the Naira reserve, and right now it has 200,000 Naira. Remember, it can actually also carry Toros, but for transparency and ease of accounting, it's made such that the Toros go into this address. For ordinary users can have any of these assets as part of their wallet. Okay, so this is all that we have, and so now we will convert that 100,000 Naira in the reserve, convert it to Toros, and let's complete that. Okay, which in about 2 seconds we should have that confirmed. Okay, it is done. So now if we check the balance, this account has spent or converted 100,000 of what is in this balance into 100,000 Toros, which will go into the Toro reserve, which we will see when we update this. Let's give that some time, and over here we'll just go back to the dashboard to see what that looks like. And here, this is going to be updated, the list of accounts, not the entire page, we just need the list of accounts. So now we see that the Toro reserve now has 100,000 Toros, and the Naira reserve still has 100,000 Naira. Notice now that on the entire blockchain, there is now only 100,000 Naira, where before there was 200,000. So 100,000 Naira no longer exists, and in its place, 100,000 Toros exist. So there's some conservation there. And the reason why this is the case is because the Toro is right now as a stable coin pegged at 1-to-1 to the Naira. So this whole everything that exists on the blockchain is still worth 200,000 Naira. And that's why we see that everything on the blockchain is actually still backed off-chain by this amount. So if anyone wants to withdraw everything that exists on the blockchain, it will be available for withdrawal, because it really does exist in the real world as assets. And the Toro reserve, I should if I refresh the entire page, this will be updated, but I just want to show this aspect. So we'll just as well go ahead and refresh it while we continue. So that is the first step of this introduction, to show how Toros are created. Now, the difference now with an actual user, which is not a node member, is a user can also bring in assets onto the blockchain, deposit assets on the blockchain, and they can purchase Toros, but they cannot have new Toros created. So we'll go into that. First thing is, let's create a user account. Now, this is a pseudonymous system, so it doesn't maintain names of any users. A separate accounting system, which node operators can maintain for customers that they register accounts for on the blockchain, is maintained in MongoDB. Although, like with Bitcoin and Ethereum, customers could also create their own account, maintain their own private keys. But right now, I'm creating an account that's in the custody of this foundation member. And so this is a customer, safe like with a bank, right? Opening an account with a bank. And so an address will be generated on the blockchain, but the like I said, the account is created. It ends with EDA4. So that's what we'll be using. We can also update this. So this is the brand new account, which we'll be using as the customer account. Okay. And so yes, on the foundation side, the customer could be registered like a real customer with a phone number and an address and everything else, and managed by the custodian organization that registered the customer, or the customer could just register themselves and maintain their own keys just like they would on Bitcoin and Ethereum. So first thing we'll do is the customer will now deposit funds onto the blockchain as well. So the customer also does need to bring in funds, and it also goes into the off-chain reserve. So this customer account, which we have here, EDA4, is going to bring, currently has nothing. It's going to bring in, let's say this let's just look at this customer as bringing in 100,000 naira to spend on the blockchain for various things. It might be that they want to purchase agricultural produce in Toros, and there will be incentives in the system, for instance, to participate in the ecosystem. All right, it might be that there are better prices in Toros, or that this produce is available in Toros because Toro maintains an ecosystem of farmers and their produce. Okay, so this customer brings in this amount and deposits it, and customers can only do that through custodian gateways or directly with custodians. So it could be like a kiosk managed by one of the foundation members that's able to actually deposit funds into the reserve. So this customer would do that through them, as similar to for a bank. If you want to deposit cash, you need to use an ATM or walk into a banking hall and deposit funds with the bank, and then you walk out and the bank will reflect this in their ledger, and you can go to the device online or elsewhere and see that. I did not put in the right paraphrase. Let's do that again. Okay, so in about a second more, this should be created onto the blockchain. I believe I got the password right this time. Alright, so this is done. And so now we see the reserve still has just the 100,000 naira, but now there's something, there's 100,000 in circulating naira, right? Total naira on the blockchain is this amount. Total in circulating is this amount, because it does not belong to the reserve. These funds are deposited into this customer's account, so it's not funds that belong to the reserve. It's funds that belong to a customer. All right, so let's take a look at what the blockchain looks like after this transaction, and also let's refresh. So here we see this reflected correctly. 100,000 Toros in supply. This needs to be updated too. But right now, 100,000 naira, but off-chain now is 300,000 if we refresh that page. But more importantly, we just want to see what all the accounts look like. And let's go back here and see what the dashboard looks like as well. Okay, so now the dashboard shows the 100,000 Toros in reserve currently, 100,000 naira in reserve, but also 100,000 naira in circulation, meaning they are in customer accounts, not in reserve. And everything is backed by 300,000 in Toros. And when we look at the accounts, the reserve still has the same thing it had before, but now a customer account now has the naira. Okay. So now this customer account, I'm going to refresh this whole page so the total off-chain reserve also is reflected. So this customer now is going to convert his Naira to Toros, which is seen as a purchase of Toros from the reserve. So only the reserve can supply Toros to users in the system. So we'll come down here and we would select the customer's account, which has a balance of 100,000, and we will take the entire customer's balance, which is 100,000, and we'll convert it all to Toros. So it's basically purchasing Toros from the reserve. It could easily also have been done that a separate interface that says convert is used for node operators when they choose to convert, and the accounts they can use for conversions are only reserve accounts, and for customers it could be buy or sell. But remember, this interface is simply for demonstration purposes. Actual applications and apps and mobile apps that's going to be for users to use will be different and will be more user friendly. Okay, so this is done, and now let's check this customer's balance. So the customer no longer has Naira, and now the customer has Toros, but no Toros were created and no Nairas were consumed. They were simply exchanged with the reserve, and we're going to see that when we go back, get out to the dashboard. I think this is refreshing as well. Actually, I'm going to refresh this entire page too, and we'll come here and see what the dashboard looks like. Okay, so now the reserve no longer has Toros because the reserve it had 100,000 Toros, but a customer came in and bought everything, and so now there are 100,000 Toros in circulation, meaning they're in customer accounts. Now the Naira now has reserve has 200,000 again because the customer's 100,000 Naira has been deposited in the reserve in exchange to the reserve selling that amount of Toros to the customer. So this is exactly what is expected. So there we see the difference between when a customer purchases Toros for Naira as a stable coin and when a reserve does the same thing, which is a creation event where it consumes the stable coin and creates the new asset, the Toro asset. Let's see this address come up. Okay, so we see it's refreshing again. Once it comes up, we're going to see that. So all of this is explained here in this presentation, but it was much easier to take a look at that practically. So this is the Naira conversion process where the customer could bring in Naira, and after they withdraw it, so we're going to go to the next step now where the customer is going to cash out his Toro, and we'll see how the reserve makes a gain. In this example, we'd use 0.9598, so we can just change it, and so the reserve will gain 0.05 at the end, whatever this exchange rate is set to, but it's set such that the sell rate is a little bit less than the buy rate, so that it's like any foreign exchange kind of environment, so that the reserve actually gains as funds flow in and out of the system. Okay, so we see that everything that's currently backing anything on the blockchain is 300,000 Naira here, and 200,000 Naira of that is in the reserve, and 100,000 Toros, which are currently valued at 1 in Naira, is circulating in a customer's account, and we can see the customer's account here. So the reserve Naira has 200,000, Toros have nothing, and a customer's account ending with EDA4 has this amount. So this is what is expected. And so now the final step to show how the reserve gains from this economic activity is to now sell the Toros back to Naira and withdraw the Nairas from the blockchain. So the customer is done with his transaction, bought produce, and did everything they wanted, and now they want to withdraw what they have in the system back out. So they're going to do that, and so their entire 100,000 Toros, they want to convert it back to Naira so that they can withdraw. On the interface end, this could be one seamless process where first converts or sells the Toros back to Naira and then does the withdrawal at a at an agent or an establishment of any of the foundation member, or at an ATM. So we're going to put in the password and complete that, and we will refresh this. Once that's completed, probably completed already, let's refresh this, and let's refresh this. Okay, so now back again, the reserve gets its Toro back because the customer has sold it back. But a difference now is the reserve, instead of having only 100,000 naira, has 105,000 naira in the reserve, and the customer has now 95,000 to withdraw. The reason why is because of the exchange rate, where the sell rate is actually includes a little bit of a gain to the reserve when the 100,000 naira has passed in and out of the reserve. So we're gonna see here the reserve now has 105,000, and the customer has this amount which the customer is going to withdraw from the blockchain. So that's the last step. Let the customer withdraw this amount. All right, so that customer account is going to withdraw his funds after everything is done. I should check. Oh, I will see the balance here, 95,000, and it's going to be withdrawn. 95,000, that's how much I could withdraw. We'll just leave a little bit in there. And this is going to be mined, and that's it. So the customer has 100,000 that they brought in. They've cashed it out, and at the end of the transaction, remember the foundation members brought in 200,000, but now the entire blockchain has gained 5,000 after this customer brought in funds and withdrew it. So the customer is done, has nothing left in the account except some dust amount, tiny amount, 6 or 7 decimal digits, and the reserve has gained 5,000. So as more activities take place on this blockchain, we can see that the reserve will eventually gain from this economic activity. Now, several things can happen. Some of the gains may be based on the decision of the foundation members, or as a policy or principle of the foundation that's agreed to by all participants. Is these gains could be shared back to foundation members, or it can actually be used to increase the value of the Toros, right? So in that sense, the Toro may not be a blockchain that's pegged permanently. It may actually be allowed to appreciate, but its appreciation will be based on real world gains, right? So because now there are 205,000 naira backing what's on the blockchain, which represents a kind of, you could call it a gain of 5,000 naira on the blockchain. A new Toro to naira rate can be set such that that gain is recognized in a gain in the value of the Toro, so that customers and everyone else, everyone that participates in the blockchain, their Toros will now appreciate to that extent, to the extent of the amount of backing for the Toros that exist on the blockchain in form of nairas. So this is at the end of the entire. All right, we need to refresh this so we can see that. So at the end of this exercise, the reserve has gained 5,000 naira compared to what they had before, after this customer brought in 100,000 naira and then withdrew the 100,000 naira when they were done with their transactions. And we're going to see that also here in the list of accounts once that comes up. One other thing to point out, which we'll see in later videos, is besides being pseudonymous, the Toro blockchain also has features that includes different rules. This is not something that exists, for instance, on like the Bitcoin or blockchain network. So we have several rules, and they have different contracts and different ways they interact on the system to enable agricultural reduction and growth as described at the beginning. It's a lot of very interesting features, if I may say so, in terms of what the blockchain can do and how it uses smart contracts and technology to enable and enforce some of the rules in such a way that allows there to be trust between the various rules and participants on this blockchain at a very, very low management rate. For instance, anyone who's run a loan portfolio will tell you the cost of loan disbursement and compliance and everything that they have to do. And if you imagine that there are several technological ways to perform those activities and how it brings down the cost of management of those and increases the efficiency of them as well. That's the kind of thing that's happening here. And there's a very smart, well thought out rules, which working with several operational people that have been involved in this field for a long time. You can look into some of the list of people that have been part of this for a while, right? Several researchers and IT professionals, of course, are behind the technology, but a group of very experienced people with a lot of knowledge in the agricultural fields and who have worked in rural areas have been instrumental in creating and formulating the smart contracts that go into this. So finally, let's take a look at this. So now the reserve off-chain ends up with 205,000 because when the customer cashes out, what they will cash out is the 95,000 naira that they brought in. Meanwhile, they did bring 100,000 into deposit initially, so that's a gain there. And in terms of the accounts, the reserve ends up with its 100,000 naira and has gained 5,000 naira in the reserve. And this ends this short, quick session.